It happened in the fall of 2021, during a strange chapter in my life when I was living alone for the first time. I just moved into this rental townhouse, tucked away in southern Illinois, one of those quiet little cul-de-sacs right off a rural highway. I was 27, technically an adult with a stable job and a pretty normal routine. But even so, the idea of living totally by myself made me anxious. I was working inventory at a distribution center back then, and by the time I got in, it was close to 10:30. I grabbed something quick to eat and crashed in bed, out cold by midnight. I called the police again, told them what I found. They said they'd add it to the report, but once again told me that since no actual crime had occurred, there wasn't anything they could do. I asked about checking with neighbors or seeing if anyone had cameras. They said unless there was a break-in or damage, they couldn't legally investigate further. I started to feel like I was losing my grip, like maybe I was making something out of nothing. But then, 2 nights later, it escalated. This time, it was 2:14 a.m. I woke up to the unmistakable sound of the back door handle turning. First gently, like someone was testing it. Then harder, like they were actually trying to open it. I sat up in bed, frozen. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel that someone was out there. My throat went dry. I grabbed my phone with trembling hands and called 911 again. As I waited, I crept out of the bedroom and crouched in the hallway. I still didn't have a real weapon. That dumb kitchen knife felt like a toy. Then the motion light clicked on. Through a tiny part in the blinds, I saw a figure. A man, tall, just standing there. Not hiding, not running, just watching. But at exactly 2:37 a.m., I shot awake to a sound that didn't belong. It was faint, but unmistakable, this metallic scraping, like something dragging across wood. My bedroom was on the ground floor, and there was a sliding glass door that led out into a small backyard with vertical blinds. A pause. I sat up, heart already pounding, and just listened. Then a soft creaking noise, like a rusty hinge groaning open. The backyard was covered in decorative gravel instead of grass, and what I heard next was the crunching of footsteps across that rock. Slow, deliberate, not an animal, definitely not a dream. I reached for the dull kitchen knife I kept in my nightstand, half embarrassed. I'd even placed it there when I moved in. I crept to the edge of the window and peeked through a sliver in the blinds. Nothing. The motion light wasn't on. Either they were just out of range, or they had come in another way. I'd just gone through a rough breakup, and part of me thought maybe some peace and solitude would help me process things. I crouched in the dark, still as possible, waiting. Maybe 10 minutes passed before red and blue lights lit up the room. I told them everything I'd heard. I opened the door, and 2 officers stood outside. One officer did a walk around while the other stayed with me and asked questions. The one who checked the backyard said the gate was closed, no sign of forced entry or anything out of place. Probably just a raccoon, one of them said, and I could tell by the way he looked at me that he didn't believe a word ID said. I didn't argue. I thanked them, locked up again, and stayed up the rest of the night, too wired to even close my eyes. The next morning, I went outside to check things for myself. That's when I noticed something I hadn't seen before. A flat stone, maybe the size of a paperback, was wedged under the fence gate in the backyard, just enough to stop the heavy spring from pulling it fully closed. It wasn't something that would have gotten there by accident. It looked like someone had placed it there on purpose, to keep the gate slightly open, maybe to slip back in later without making a sound. The townhouse itself was nothing special part of a neat row of near-identical beige units with vinyl siding, little front lawns, trimmed bushes, and wind chimes that jingled when the wind blew. Most of the people in the neighborhood were older couples or small families. I didn't really talk to anyone, which was fine by me. I liked keeping to myself. But even in those first few days, I noticed one neighbor who stood out in a way that I couldn't quite shake. He lived 3 doors down. Tall guy, broad shoulders, maybe mid-40s, always wearing these ratty old jeans and a hoodie no matter the weather. He had this thick beard and just a presence. Almost every night when I pulled into my driveway after work, usually around 9 or 10, he'd be there, just standing, either leaning against his porch rail or pacing slowly in front of his house, sometimes smoking, sometimes not doing anything at all, just standing and staring. Never said a word to me, never waved. If I glanced over, his eyes would already be on me, expression unreadable. I tried telling myself he was just a night owl, or maybe had insomnia or something harmless like that. But it didn't sit right. There was this eerie stillness to him. He never shifted his weight, never fidgeted, never checked his phone. Around mid-September, I came home from a long shift. Just stood perfectly still like a statue planted at the edge of his driveway. Over time, that sense of unease grew. It went from a weird neighbor I tried to ignore to a feeling in my gut that something wasn't right. Then came the noises. I called 911. The dispatcher was calm and professional, took my info, and said officers were on their way. I picked up the rock and hurled it across the yard, my skin crawling. It was the same 2 officers who showed up again. This time, they actually found something footprints in the gravel. Big ones, leading right up to my back door. But still, because there was no forced entry, no damage, and the man wasn't armed or caught in the act, there was nothing they could officially act on. They told me they'd patrol the area more often, gave the same old advice about keeping everything locked, and left. I broke the lease, forfeited the deposit, and started packing. I couldn't stay another night. I didn't even care about the financial loss. I just needed out. And then, the final straw. On the day I officially left, I checked my mailbox one last time. Handwritten, lined notebook paper. Cramped, uneven lettering that looked rushed or obsessive. There was a note wedged inside. The note read, "The cops leave." But I don't. I was already gone. I never went back. That was it. No name, no signature. Just that sentence. I brought it to the police, filed one last report. The officer who took it looked genuinely disturbed. Said they'd do a wellness check on the neighborhood and follow up. But by then, it didn't matter. That's when I decided I needed to take things into my own hands. The very next day, I bought a Wi-Fi security camera system, not top of the line, but good enough. I set one camera up over the back door and another at the front porch. That night, I didn't even go to sleep. I sat in the dark living room with my phone in hand, eyes glued to the live camera feed. I kept the lights off, kept quiet, and just watched. 2:14 a.m. came and went nothing. But then, at 2:23, the back camera triggered. A man stepped into frame. He came through the gate like he'd done it 100 times before, moving in a way that avoided the motion sensor until the very last second. The moment he crossed into view, the camera lit up and I saw him. Tall, broad shoulders, wearing a black hoodie with the hood up, jeans, gloves. He walked up to the door like he owned the place, looked directly at the camera, and smiled. Not a quick grin, a long, slow, stretched-out smile that sent a chill down my spine. Then he backed away, still holding that smile, and disappeared into the darkness. I called the police again and showed them the clip. They watched, admitted it was disturbing, but repeated the same line. No crime, no break-in, no weapon, and nothing they could do. That was it. They wouldn't even go ask the guy down the street if he had any footage. I practically begged them, and they said their hands were tied. That night, I didn't even go to bed. I packed a bag and got a room at a cheap hotel just to get away. When I came back the next morning, hoping to grab more clothes and possibly make a plan to move out, I found something new: 4 muddy handprints smeared on the glass of the back door. 2 prints were high up and 2 were lower, like someone had crouched down and pressed their hands there, just staring inside for a long time. About a month later, I got a message on Facebook from someone named Kayla. She just moved into the same unit I'd left. Her message was short and casual at first. "Hey, sorry to bother you. I think you used to live here?" And then she asked something that made my stomach turn. "Did you ever notice someone in a black hoodie hanging around the backyard?" I moved on. Then the phone rang again. Again, the static. My phone. Unknown caller. This time, I stepped into the hallway to answer. But my gut said something was deeply wrong. I tried calling my supervisor, but I was stubborn. I told myself I was being paranoid. I had a job to do. So I kept going. No luck. The call failed. But after a few seconds, I heard something soft, barely a whisper. "Don't answer the phone in the bedroom." That was it. My heart thudded in my chest. The house was still. I didn't want to know anymore. I couldn't. Dozens of them? No names I recognized, but all local. Last night, someone knocked on the glass door around 2 and just stood there. Some were sad, completely silent. Then the line went dead. I checked every window, every door still closed. Everything was still there: faded furniture, lace curtains, porcelain figurines. No sign of a break-in. My signal dropped to 1 bar for a second, then nothing. I thought about leaving. The door was swollen from humidity, so I had to shove it open. No response. My job was simple: photograph everything inside, catalog it, and get it ready for winter. I hung up and chalked it up to a glitch. I kept working, taking photos room by room. I've been hearing footsteps at night. I didn't respond. I just hoped she'd do what I didn't get out before it got worse. A year before that, in 2020, I was working for a property preservation company. Basically, we handled foreclosed homes, securing them, cleaning them out, winterizing, sometimes boarding them up if there had been damage or break-ins. Inside, it smelled like stale air and dust. It felt like walking into someone's memory. Then my work phone rang. That shouldn't have happened. I'd already checked. There was no service out there. No bars. But it buzzed anyway. Caller ID just said, "Unknown." I answered. Nothing but static. A low, crackling hiss. I said hello. Twice. The hallway smelled faintly metallic, like old coins, and one of the bedrooms was filled with newspaper clippings, pinned to a corkboard. All obituaries. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid decently, and I mostly worked alone, which I liked. You end up spending a lot of time in empty houses that used to belong to people who vanished without a trace. Some places felt peaceful, and then there were a few that felt wrong. This story is about one of those. It was a small one-story house in upstate New York, a dying town with more shuttered businesses than open ones. The kind of place where time forgot to keep moving. I arrived on a Monday morning with a box truck and my gear. The house sat on a dirt road surrounded by woods and overgrown brush, no neighbors in sight. It had been foreclosed after the owner, an elderly woman, passed away, and no heirs had stepped forward to claim the place. Utilities had been shut off for over a year. The house looked fine from the outside, just run down. In the master bedroom, I saw something I hadn't in years, a rotary phone. Yellowed with age, unplugged, obviously disconnected. I returned to the living room and began boxing up the smaller items, books, glassware, knickknacks, just wanting to get the job over with. But the whole time, I felt it. That feeling of being watched. I kept glancing toward the hallway, half expecting someone to be standing there. At some point, I realized I wasn't even breathing normally. Lena H., July 3rd, 2019. Rang once, didn't answer. Carl, September 12th, 2019. Picked up, warned him. Page after page like this. Dozens of them. I suddenly felt like I was reading a logbook for something sinister. My blood ran cold as I slowly turned around, scanning the basement with wide eyes, convinced someone or something was still down there with me. I bolted up the stairs, taking them two at a time, heart hammering so hard it hurt. I dropped the notebook, watching me from the shadows. My chest felt tight, like I was subconsciously bracing for something. Or the notebook, or the whisper. I turned in the keys and filed a report, saying the property was unsafe, possibly compromised by squatters, and recommended reassignment. I didn't mention the calls. He was too freaked out. 2 days later, I got a text from one of the other guys, Mark. He'd been sent out to finish the job. I hadn't told him what I'd seen. His message just said, "That phone in the bedroom rang while I was in there. What the hell?" I called him immediately. He said he didn't answer it. I could tell from his voice he was shaken. Bad? The next day, Mark quit. That phone wasn't connected to anything. The line was dead. There was no service in the house. No electricity. Just like that. And again. Then stopped. Silence returned to the house. No 2-week notice. No explanation. Packed up his tools and walked off the job. I found his Facebook months later. He's fine, still posts occasionally, but we never talked again. Then it happened again. Another ring. I held my flashlight in front of me, scanning each corner. But this time, it wasn't my phone. It was the rotary phone in the bedroom. Each page had a name, a date, and a brief sentence. I froze. I got in my truck and drove straight back to the office. Yet I could hear it from across the house, sharp, mechanical, clear. That old-fashioned bell sound, ringing from a phone that by every rule of logic shouldn't be ringing. My legs felt like lead, but I forced myself to move. Slowly, I walked down the hallway, phone still in my hand, light from the living room shrinking behind me. As I got closer, the ringing got louder. I stepped into the bedroom doorway. The rotary phone sat on the nightstand, just where it had been before. But now, with every shrill ring, the receiver shook slightly in its cradle, like something was vibrating through it. I didn't answer it. I didn't even go inside. I stood in the doorway, just watching it ring. It rang again. I backed out slowly, never taking my eyes off that phone. At that point, I should have left. Honestly, everything in me was screaming to go. But I was supposed to secure the house before leaving, and part of that meant checking the basement. I don't know if it was pride, or fear of looking weak, or just that I didn't want to leave with unanswered questions, but I stayed. The basement door was in the kitchen. I opened it, and a wave of stale, damp air hit me. The steps creaked as I descended. The walls were lined with shelves holding old paint cans, broken tools, and scattered junk. In the far corner, there was a small wooden table. On it sat a cordless phone newer than the one upstairs, but just as dusty. Next to it was a stack of old yellowed notebooks. I picked one up and started flipping through it. I didn't finish the job. After that, my boss finally called the local sheriff to check for squatters. They went out there, searched the property, and found nothing. No one inside, no signs of entry, no damage. The place was exactly as we'd left it. I think about that house more than I'd like to admit. Everything about it, the isolation, the dusty air, the newspaper clippings, the strange phone calls, it all felt like I'd stepped into a different reality. Louder, sharper. I opened the bathroom door and looked nothing. I pressed my ear to the basement door, and after a moment of silence, I heard breathing. Slow, steady, right on the other side. I didn't go down there again. I called my landlord. Then one night, I came home and found the basement door wide open. He came by, checked the place out. No broken windows, no animals, no signs of anything. He thought I was being paranoid. I let it go. I left everything behind and never went back. For a while, the light didn't work. I grabbed a flashlight and peered down, heard slow footsteps coming up the stairs. I didn't go near it. I nailed the door shut. I slammed the door shut and felt something pushing from the other side, but it didn't force its way in. It just leaned there. Then it stopped. A horror movie you can't explain afterward. Another house. Another quiet neighborhood. Another mistake. I was in my late 20s, living alone again. One night, around 3 on May, I was heading to bed after a shift when I heard it. Not from the front door. Not the windows, but from the basement. I stopped cold in the hallway. To this day, I still don't know what happened there. Until I got home and saw the padlock on the floor broken, the door ajar. I backed up, stared at the door, and waited. Nothing else came. Woke up days later to a whisper coming from beneath the floorboards, directly under my bed. That was it. And sometimes, late at night in my new apartment, I still wonder if I had stayed just a little longer. What would have come up those stairs? No footprints, no signs of entry. I tell myself it must have been some kind of elaborate prank or hoax. But part of me knows that's just wishful thinking. And then there was 2019. I'd found a cheap rental house on the edge of town, not much. Just an old one-story place with a backyard and a creaky basement. The floors groaned when you walked. The walls were thin, and the kitchen cabinets were a little off. But it was cheap, and it had space, so I moved in without much hesitation. I used the basement for storage extra furniture, tools, stuff like that. The only thing I didn't like was how the light switch for the basement was halfway down the stairs. You had to take 3 or 4 steps in total darkness to even reach it. That always gave me a weird feeling, like something was waiting at the bottom of those stairs. But I told myself it was just nerves, just my imagination. That lasted until October. 3 soft knocks. I thought maybe it was the pipes or the house settling, but then it happened again. 3 deliberate knocks. I whispered to myself, "It's just the house," but I didn't believe it. I locked my bedroom door and stayed awake until sunrise. The next day, I went down there with a flashlight. Everything was untouched. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling. I tried to move on. But a few nights later, I was brushing my teeth when I heard it again. 1 knock this time. I installed a padlock the next day. For a month, nothing happened.